Welcome to the Pitcher Nail Down. I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11. With me is Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL. Taking a look at pitching on tonight's 14-game slate, which does include a Coors game, Mets and Rockies, and really only one kind of real top option with Chris Sale tonight, and kind of just a whole lot of slosh, underneath him for tonight's slate.
Yeah, and we were kind of discussing before the show that this is really kind of a unique slate in that regard that, there are some decisions to be made. Are you going to pay up a pitcher, if not Sale, some of those upper mid-tier options, or are you just going to go cheap and stack? There's a Coors game that has a 10 over-under. That Texas-Toronto game has a 10 over-under. And there's a couple others, I believe, around 9. So, it's a night to target the bats, definitely. So it kind of leaves us with some strategy to decide at the pitcher spot. So a lot of different routes you can take, just depending on what your preferences are at hitter tonight.
Yeah, definitely. The Giants-Diamondbacks sitting at 9 as well. Padres-Brewers at 9 in Miller Park. So, a lot of favorable ballparks outside of Coors that you can kind of expand to. So, jumping right into things, you got the Tigers and Orioles. Chris Tillman at home taking on Justin Verlander. Over-under of 8.5 here. Friendly ballpark in Camden Yards, 8.5 total. Tillman, he's had a really solid stretch here. And you obviously look at this Tigers team that, are middle of the road, I guess you could say, in offense. They've kind of picked it up a little bit lately, but do have a pretty monster strikeout rate of 24.7% this season. I'm still, you and I are in agreement. Tillman, not really sold on him picking up any sort of strong start on tonight's slate.
Right, and even though the Tigers have been kind of up and down, they can really blow up at any point in time. So in Camden Yards, I just don't really think it's the time for Tomlin, or Tillman, I should say. He has been solid lately, but that, of course, has risen his price point too, so you have that to worry about. I don't think you can really justify paying $7,900 on FanDuel when you have other guys, more secure guys like Edison Volquez, Odorizzi, maybe Rich Hill for a little bit more that you could easily pivot to and feel a little bit safer about.
Yeah, definitely. You got to kind of look at Tillman's opposing opponents as well. Oakland, New York, Tampa Bay. Not the strongest offenses by any means. So Tigers definitely a step ahead. Verlander on the other side there. I'm not really a fan of his tonight, just taking on Baltimore in that ballpark and the way they are, and just their offense against right-handed pitching in general. And Verlander just too up and down for me to even consider.
Yeah, and he's been okay. You throw out some of those really bad games, he's actually been pretty solid. I believe he's had one or two down performances, but other than that, he's been kind of looking like his old self a little bit. But Vegas really hates him tonight. Baltimore, they're kind of a sneaky stack against him. I'm guessing they'll be under-owned due to that Coors game, those other high-scoring games that we saw. But they have a 4.5 run total, so there's someone smarter than me, someone in Vegas, definitely believes in that offense tonight and the way they've been swinging the bat lately. That may not be that bad of a call to stack some of their sluggers if you're making multiple entries.
Yeah, definitely. I think you could probably actually get some of them at a low ownership just because there are so many high-scoring games tonight. Next one here, you got White Sox and Yankees. Chris Sale, Luis Severino, over under a 7. Chicago -140 favorites. It's in Yankee Stadium, which isn't always a favorable spot for pitchers, but overall, Sale, by far the dominant arm tonight. And the big question mark is, do you pay up for him on tonight's slate with all the pitching options? And I think, if you want a quality start, that's pretty much for sure, and a win, I do think it's with Sale.
Yeah, it's pretty tough to do that and miss out on some of those hitters that you really like tonight. But I think you could go with him, feel confident about that, just because the other mid-range, lower-tier pitchers, or cheaper pitchers, I should say, aren't a sure thing. So, you could really get a pretty bad performance from some of them and really leave it to your hitters to make up some of that slack. So if you want to look at probably around a 60 fantasy point performance, that's not out of the question with Chris Sale, the way he's been throwing tonight. You look at this, the Yankees have one of the lowest totals on the board, despite playing in Yankee Stadium, very hitter-friendly. We should note that there are some storms predicted in New York. but it looks like that's a little bit earlier. It should be before game time. And then the threat of rain should dwindle down to about 10%, 20% maybe when the game starts. So pay attention to that to see if that changes, but it looks okay for now. That Sale should get the game in without interruption. So I really like him if you are paying up, if that's the strategy you want to take.
Yeah, definitely. And on the other side, Luis Severino going up against the White Sox team, that middle of the road. I think a win's kind of unlikely for him tonight. He's been fairly up and down. I think he does possess some sort of upside. We saw that with the Red Sox game. Obviously, he had a couple bad innings, but overall, 9 strikeouts in that game. So he can dial it up at times. I think he's obviously a risky play tonight, but kind of at that price tag. This White Sox offense doesn't scare me too much.
Right. I'm not really a believer. I think he can go a little bit better at some other spots. Granted, he is cheaper than some other high upside pitchers, but I'm actually looking to maybe target against him in a couple spots in tournaments. He has a 25.6 home run to fly ball rate, and in Yankee Stadium, you combine that fact. Jose Abreu and Todd Frazier really kind of strike my interest in that regard because he has allowed the deep ball to right-handed sluggers, and those two really kind of fit that profile, and it feeds into their upside.
Yeah, definitely. He has had those reverse splits, and I'm definitely on those names that you mentioned there. Marlins and Nationals, Tom Koehler, Gio Gonzalez, over-under of 8. Washington minus 166 favorites. Both these arms here, it's tough to really get behind them. Gio, his price tag is what's something that kind of popped out at me before when I was looking. But a matchup against the Marlins, obviously Stanton, Ozuna, Real Muto, Prado, all hit well from the right side there against lefties. And I just think in that ballpark, it's not extremely pitcher friendly, so I'm kind of staying away.
Yeah, I wrote Gio up as kind of a GPP pick or a borderline cash option if you need somebody in that range and you love your team otherwise. The Marlins, they have a 3.5 total tonight, kind of on the lower end of the spectrum, but as you said, they can blow up against left-handed pitching with Stanton, Ozuna, Prado. Those guys, those right-handed hitters, have been swinging the bat very well lately. So that's kind of concerning, and that's why he's more on the borderline cash than, being a safe cash game play. Even though he is a minus 170 favorite, he should get the run support needed to collect that win. And he's overall pretty solid pitcher. I know his last 2 starts were pretty uninspiring, especially in the strikeout department, but I'm willing to bet that he gets back on track tonight. Granted, there is a little bit of risk involved in that.
Yeah, I think one thing to also note is on FanDuel, he's the 3rd most expensive pitcher at $8,900, so really steep there. While on DraftKings, he's priced much lower, $8,100, and he's about maybe the 10th if I just had to guess it here. So I think that's one thing to note as well. So I don't mind paying down to him on DraftKings as like an SP2 option or GPPs or something like that. But FanDuel, I think he's kind of off the radar for me.
Right, I agree with that.
Tom Koehler, he's kind of your average right-hander. I can't really get behind him tonight.
Right, and taking on that Nationals team at home who, they just jump on opposing pitchers there. I could easily see that again tonight. There's some very good BVP numbers for whatever that's worth. Rendon, Harper, and Zimmerman, the 2, 3, 4 hitters, all in that lineup have pretty much owned Koehler. So I think that's a pretty fair stay away. Even though, if you recall earlier this season, Koehler had a pretty decent outing against the Nationals. I don't really think that's going to hold out. I'm not buying into him at all tonight.
Yeah, he's averaged, or he's only allowed 3 earned runs in 2 starts, but I'm with you. I just think this Nationals team is something I stay away from, especially at home, and the way Daniel Murphy and Harper are swinging the bats right now. Next game here, you got Reds and Phillies, Brandon Finnegan versus Jeremy Hellickson. It's in Philly, 8.5 over-under here, and Brandon Finnegan's a guy we were kind of joking around with before the show. But, you do go back to his 1 start against the Phillies at the beginning of the season. Pitched pretty well, which kind of is expected because Phillies ranked 29th in WOBA against lefties this season and also do have a high strikeout rate. I'm not necessarily against Finnegan as a cheap guy into GPP, but, I'm not expecting a ton out of him tonight. Kind of a hopeful pick.
Yeah, I'd go other – there's some other cheap guys in there. that I think are a little bit safer and have more upside. We just haven't seen that type of strikeout rate throughout the season. I mean, that he had in that first game against the Phillies. So that's more of an outlier, in my opinion, than anything. Even though this Phillies team could help him in that regard, I think they're a better offense now than they were early in the season. They've kind of figured things out. They've kind of assembled their lineup a little more how they want it now. And I'm actually going to target a few hitters against Finnegan tonight. Generally hitter-friendly ballpark there in Philly. Cameron Rupp, if he bats cleanup again at catcher, he's a cheap pick that could help you fit in some other higher-priced bats, or maybe bump up the sale or a more expensive pitcher. So that's a guy that I'm targeting at a catcher position that's really just kind of mediocre tonight. So I think you can get some savings there. Against Finnegan.
Yeah. On the other side here, Jeremy Hellickson, I'm, looking to target against him as well. I think the Reds will go pretty low owned. Obviously, Hellickson, you're kind of mediocre right-hander, and guys like Votto stand out to me as kind of an interesting swerve. Same with Phillips, who remains fairly cheap, even though he's been swinging the bat well. So I can't really get behind Hellickson either.
Yeah, and speaking to that point, Hellickson for his career has been reverse splits guy, but over the past season and a half, he's actually been more friendly to lefties. So I think you can target righties and lefties against him and feel pretty confident in that. And some of the Reds hitters make for a little more of an economical stack that you can blend in kind of easier with your higher scoring teams like, say, the Brewers, the Mets, or the Rangers or Blue Jays. So they're a good secondary stack to fit in there if you want to do the classic 4 from each team stack and then fit whatever pitcher you can in.
Yeah, definitely. Next one here, this is the big weather concern tonight, Astros and Red Sox. Lance McCullers making his debut this season, and then Stephen Wright, who's, arguably my favorite player now. I think I'm going to go out and get myself a Stephen Wright jersey next time I'm down at Fenway, just because it makes sense. I mean, he's just been so rewarding to me. But overall, I mean, this game, heavy rain throughout most of the night, so I think overall this is one to just kind of stay away from for hitters and pitchers.
Yeah, can you look outside real quick and tell me if it's raining or what the skies look like around the general area to see if there's threat of some nasty clouds coming in? Or
yeah, it's supposed to rain all night. I mean, it's been gray and windy all day, and it looks like it's going to get one of those kind of spring showers throughout most of the night.
All right, so you heard it here officially from our weatherman.
Yes.
So, if it doesn't happen, be sure to give him crap on Twitter. But obviously, all the reports that I've seen, it looks like a 70 to even sometimes 100% chance of rain. So, looks like a safe stay away here, even though both of us would like to target Stephen Wright. He's just been awesome lately. And he had, his last start against Houston, he was very good as well. So, all that looks like lost analysis in this one. We'll just have to move on and find some other options.
Yeah, definitely. And Twins Indians, Ricky Nolasco, Josh Tomlin, 8.5 over under here. Cleveland minus 146 favorites. And neither of these arms I can't get behind just because I don't think there's enough upside out of really any of them. Of course, Nolasco, but Tomlin, obviously, I think people will look at that 3.72 ERA. Obviously, he's 5-0 and be somewhat drawn in. But obviously, this Minnesota team, they are quite boom or bust. But I think you've talked about times in the past that the Twins know certain AL Central pitchers well, and kind of Tomlin, they just know his ways, and he doesn't bring a lot of versatility to the table.
Right, and that's exactly what we saw in his first start against the Twins. Only one strikeout in 5 innings, gave up several runs, so a pretty upsetting performance and otherwise a decent start to the season for him. But the Twins, they kind of feast on fastball pitchers. They've seen Tomlin a lot, not a ton of deception there. So I think that really limits his upside that the Twins can make some solid contact against him. So I'm not as sold. Maybe you can fire him out in a GPP, but for the price tag you're paying, I just don't think the upside's there. Even though the matchup looks great on paper, the Twins really know who they're going against tonight, and I think that will reduce their strikeout rate from the season average.
Yeah, definitely. Tomlin, if you recall from last part of 2015, he was a high strikeout guy and kind of, built some steam heading into 2016, but we haven't seen those same type of numbers. He's been fairly average. And on the other side, Nolasco, guy I'm looking to target some Cleveland bats against, just because he's been very friendly to stack against over the last really 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, he was actually good to begin this season, which kind of came out of nowhere. And then, I mean, he kind of settled into that gas can we've all come to know and love over the past 3 or 4 games. So that's kind of has been his role. And it looks like, that's going to be his role continuing throughout this year. So you can safely stack some hitters against him.
Yeah, I mean, 14 runs over the last 3 starts, so not looking good for him. Next one here, I mean, a friendly situation on both sides, Rays and Athletics. In Tropicana, over-under 7, so 1 year lower scoring, over-unders on the night. Tampa, just a small favorite, minus 114, so essentially a pick-em game between these 2 arms. I do like both of them. I do like Rich Hill. I think he's got a big-time strikeout upside against this Rays team. The one thing, I mean, I can definitely see maybe Rich Hill running into a little bit of trouble just because they toss in some platoon guys up top. Obviously, Forsythe, Longoria hit lefties well, and he toss in guys like Geyer. But obviously, I mean, his K percentage this season's through the roof, so I think reasonably GPP option. The way Vegas is leaning, I think he's playable in all formats.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think he's the higher upside pitcher of these two. Talking about Odorizzi on the other side for Tampa Bay. But I wrote both of these guys up in the Pitching Pulse article today, and exactly like that, with Hill being the GPP, kind of a little more expensive. You have to pay a premium for that strikeout upside, but he's, I mean, just been amazing lately. I mean, navigating through lineups like Houston, Detroit, that pose a lot of threat from, the right side of the plate, some home run threat. He's been able to neutralize them fairly well. And then you have a pitcher-friendly ballpark here in Tampa. And even though there are some good right-handed hitters, you mentioned Forsythe, Longoria, Pierce, this Tampa lineup is very top-heavy. So if he can navigate through that top half, he should be able to slide past the bottom half there and, really kind of, stretch his outing and give him more efficiency with his pitches. Granted, he is an underdog tonight, so you have to kind of take that into consideration. That win probability, both these pitchers kind of pulling against each other. Odorizzi is a little bit cheaper. This Oakland team doesn't love to strike out, but they're a very mediocre offense in a pitcher-friendly ballpark, so I think he's kind of a safe starter if you need someone in that range. Vegas projects this one as a low total. Oakland, obviously on the other side of that. But, yeah, I mean, Odorizzi's kind of been all over the map lately, but his profile for strikeouts is pretty strong overall. So I think he could deliver a solid performance, something like 6 innings, 5-6 strikeouts, maybe 1 earned run or so.
Yeah, and he's always been a guy that pitches better at home too, so that kind of goes well in his favor. So I think both these arms are quality, and I think really this game outside of Sale between those 3 guys just feel kind of the safest to me. Next one here, you got Blue Jays and Rangers, R.A. Dickey, Martin Perez. Over under of 10, essentially a pick 'em here, Toronto minus 106. And really, I mean, I'm not too prone to target against Dickey here, but I think obviously Perez is going to be someone I stack against because, I mean, the Jays are going to come around against lefties. We've seen it before with Holland so far this season, even though they haven't been exactly their 2015 selves yet.
Yeah, this game's kind of interesting to me. I mean, granted, it's a 10 over-under, just as high as the Coors game, but you don't really know who to stack against Dickey. I mean, everyone on Texas, they have either, some not so inspiring numbers or very mediocre numbers against Dickey. So, I mean, you could go to Odor or maybe Fielder, but Beltre doesn't have very good numbers. I mean, I just don't really know where to go with that for the hitter side of things. And then on the other side, obviously you like the right-handed Jays, but Martin Perez keeps the ball in the yard. I mean, even in Texas, a pretty hitter-friendly, home run-friendly environment there. With the exception of Josh Donaldson, he's pretty good against right-handed home run hitters, at least in the regard of keeping them in the yard. So that kind of limits the upside of the Jays. Granted, they could get things done just by hitting doubles, singles, keeping the bases moving. But I mean, they're expensive as well, and I don't really know where they fit in the grand scheme of, the Mets, the Brewers, the Rangers, all these teams with high totals tonight. So It'll be interesting, and it's definitely going to spread out some of the ownership percentage between these top-scoring teams.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And Martin Perez, 54% ground ball rate going back to this season so far. So, as you mentioned, he does a great job of keeping the ball in the yard. And I think Donaldson's kind of my preferred play if I had to pick anyone, obviously, outside that Toronto team. And then you're kind of getting a little bit more deeper into the GPP territory with guys like Bautista and stuff like that. Next one here, we're getting into the Padres and Brewers, another over-under of 9 game. And Christian Friedrich, a lefty on the hill against this Brewers team that's heavily right-handed. I'm looking to stack Brewers tonight. I think they're in a great spot. But also, Junior Guerra on the other side here should be in line for a win. Milwaukee minus 140, obviously a friendly matchup against the Padres. But Miller Park, it obviously bodes well for hitters. I think that kind of scares me a little bit. Guerra's given up, 4 earned in 2 starts this season, so it's not like he's been great and gives you much to feel comfortable about. It's just that Padres matchup.
Right, that and the cheap price point, because you stack all those guys around him. There's a lot of hitters to target, as we said a little bit earlier, but I think he's a fine GPP pick if you want to go with that strategy of stacking, just because the San Diego offense is so bad and they have a very high strikeout rate against right-handers. And in Guerra's last outing, he actually struck out 6 innings. So a little bit of confidence going into this matchup. Granted, before that game, he hasn't done much of anything really, and this is a hitter-friendly park, but there aren't too many San Diego hitters with the platoon advantage that really scare you in this lineup. You have to look out for Matt Kemp, who's a righty. Maybe Will Myers. He hasn't done much lately since joining the Padres anyway. So, it's just the matchup you're focused on here. He should get some run support. So, a win, maybe higher than usual strikeouts and some run support. That's the rationale for picking him tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I think kind of a reasonable outcome coming in tonight. Maybe I'm hoping 6 innings, maybe 2 to 3 earned. A generous 5 to 6K strikeout, and then the win just seems doable to pay off that price tag. And as you mentioned, the more important thing is it allows you to really build up all the bats that you kind of want.
Yeah, but if you want to be different and go against that, by all means. He's far from a lock tonight. Even with the matchup looking good. So if you want to be sneaky, I think he's going to be one of the more popular, cheaper picks to stack around tonight for tournaments. So if you want to be sneaky and go with someone else, by all means.
Yeah, definitely. This next one here, we got Julio Teheran, Edison Volquez in Kauffman Stadium, so you like that for both arms. Over under 7.5, KC minus 159 favorites. Volquez been a little bit shaky of late, but in a great spot here at home against Atlanta. Obviously, dead last in WOBA against right-handed pitching. Their strikeout rate's coming down. I know it was high at the beginning of the year, but they're starting to not strike out again as much as they did last year, or like last year when it was down in the teens. So once again, Volquez kind of sits in that range. He's 8K on DraftKings. I definitely don't mind him. Kind of in all formats, really. I know the upside's a little bit limited, but I think that salary relief is just enough for me.
Right, and he's one of the safer pitchers, I believe, tonight. Aside from Chris Sale, who's just dominant, but you're obviously paying a high premium for him. So he's one of the safer of those mid-range, upper mid-range pitchers. Going against an Atlanta team that's one of the worst in the league on offense. And he's at home. Julio Teheran has had his problems. They're well documented against left-handed hitters, and that's all Kansas City really has. Aside from Lorenzo Cain, their best hitters are all left-handed, so the run support should be there. The only thing that's kind of concerning about him tonight and impacting his safety, has to do with the weather. It looks like there could be a potential delay tonight. You have about 100% to 75% chance of rain in the early innings there over the first hour and a half of that game. So there should be a delay, and then it should clear up after that. Obviously things could kind of take a turn, as we've seen in the Midwest with the weather so far up to this point in the season. So definitely something to pay attention to. But if it looks like just a delay, then it's clearing up. I'll roll with Edison Volquez as a very safe option.
Yeah, you're kind of hoping for that delay in comparison to starting the game and then having a delay because that kills pitchers at times. But that is one to keep an eye on. I mean, it's just 2 Eastern. Obviously, things can change. And on the other side, we touched on the glaring problems that T-Ren has, and it's with those lefties and on the road. Obviously, Kauffman Stadium's nice, park to pitch in, but he's just not playable against this Royals team.
Right. Yep.
Mets Rockies here. Matt Harvey, Jonathan Gray, over under of 10. I mean, obviously Harvey's price is knocked down. I think this is more something that we consider for opposing batters on the Rockies side, is because Harvey's pitching. Those price tags are still, Coors inflated. So do they meet those price tags? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think the Rockies will be a little less popular because of that. Their prices are all very high, and they're going against some actually very good pitchers tonight. I mean, even though their run total is still up there around 5, it's just hard to really justify their cost for most of the hitters you really want on that side. And then on the other side, John Gray, obviously probably one of the better options to stack against tonight. I mean, granted, the Mets, they're all priced up. They have that Coors bump as well. It's kind of hard to fit them in if you are spending it up on pitchers. So kind of just, it's going to be one of those nights where you're just mixing and matching and see what goes where and what you like, because there's so many different routes to take, whether you're stacking these Mets, whether you're paying up for pitcher. I mean, who you can get in for the value fillers if you're going with, the higher cost hitters. It's just one of those nights, but the Mets certainly look like an offensive target here. I mean, John Gray has been decent this season, but not at home. I mean, he's a pitcher to target, maybe on the road in a good matchup, but you can definitely stack hitters against him and feel good about it here in Coors.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, severe, home and road splits here. Obviously, short MLB service time for him, but coming off back-to-back strong starts, but on the road in AT&T Park in Petco. So we'll be coming back down to life here against this Mets team. Next game here, we got the Giants and Diamondbacks in Chase Field, over-under of 9. Jeff Samardzija coming off really strong starts. Obviously, Shelby Miller's been on the complete opposite side of the spectrum of the season. I mean, when he can make it out of his starts, he seems to leave about every other one.
Yeah, Shelby Miller, he's definitely someone to stack against tonight. And San Francisco has a surprisingly very high total here. I know Shelby Miller hasn't been very good, but to put San Francisco in the same category as, say, the Mets or the Blue Jays tonight is some pretty strong takes by Vegas, in my opinion. So, looking to those left-handed hitters from San Francisco could be kind of an underrated strategy tonight. And then on the other side, Jeff Samardzija, he has been very good lately, but if you look at those games, they're all either against weak opponents or at home in that notorious pitcher-friendly ballpark at AT&T Field. So kind of transitioning over to Chase Field, which is one of the more hitter-friendly ballparks, I think we need to proceed with some caution, especially if Samardzija hasn't been the greatest in those types of settings. You think back to Milwaukee earlier this season, not a great Brewers lineup, but they gave him a lot of trouble. So I think something similar could play out tonight, and some of those Arizona bats are kind of sneaky in that regard.
Yeah, you can even go back to a couple of games ago against the Padres. 5 earned in 5 innings at home. That just seems like such a lock, and obviously that shows how volatile he is. And just at that price tag, $9,500 on DraftKings, I know he's up there on $96 on FanDuel. If he was maybe $2,000 cheaper, $2,500, I maybe give some consideration as maybe a single shot guy, but those price tags, that's way too steep.
Right.
Next one here, you got Angels and Mariners, Nick Tropiano, Nate Karns, over under of 8. Seattle minus 143 favorites. Tropiano's kind of the other cheap option that we'll take a gander at just because of that strikeout rate, so high throughout the season. And his swinging strike rate of 14% is pretty incredible so far. Obviously, I don't expect that to really continue, but it is at an elite level right now. And this Mariners team, really heavily left-handed, so that is a bit of a concern for me. I think it's going to be one of those boomer bust nights for Tropiano there. Yeah,
certainly. He's one of those pivots away from the Milwaukee pitcher that you could feasibly put in there and expect a higher upside. Granted, it comes with a little bit more of a risk due to the matchup, him playing away from home. And Nate Karns on the other side is actually a pretty solid pitcher. who has been performing pretty well lately. So all that kind of adds into the risk for Tropiano. But there is some strikeout upside to be had if this is one of those games where he's on, as he certainly was last time around. So on the other side of this, Nate Karns, I just think he's too expensive for what you expect to get out of him. I mean, he should pitch a quality start against tonight, 7 innings, maybe 2-3 earned runs, 5-6 strikeouts. I mean, that seems like it's in the cards for him, but it's just hard for me to justify that cost when you could go with Edison Volquez and feel safer, or you could go with upside like Rich Hill and feel better about him getting a higher total, higher ceiling there. So, I mean, he's just kind of lost in the middle for me. Not a guy I'm really targeting at all tonight.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Last game of the night here, Cardinals and Dodgers, Michael Wacha versus Ross Stripling. Over under 7.5, Dodgers minus 126 favorites. This is a game, I mean, obviously it's a fairly low over-under in comparison to the other games on the slate. I mean, the Dodgers offense hasn't been that great. Yes, they showed some power against Bartolo Colon last night, but overall, I mean, they've been a very middle-of-the-road, lackadaisical offense, and I think both these pitchers just don't have any sort of upside for me to even consider on tonight's slate, even though Vegas just kind of has this one as a 7.5 pick-em type game in Dodger Stadium at night, which is obviously favorable as well.
Right, and I mean, this seems like just a game to stay away all around. I mean, you don't really like the hitters. The pitchers are good enough to kind of keep them at bay. And then you don't really like either pitcher. I mean, Wacha maybe a little bit because he has a higher strikeout rate, but I mean, on the road as an underdog against a Dodgers lineup that could really blow up at any time, you just don't see a whole lot of upside for the price there. So, and then on the other side, Ross Stripling, not much upside to begin with, and you throw in a matchup against a kind of a pesky Cardinals lineup with a lot of good left-handed hitters. And, I mean, you just don't really see him as a fantasy prospect at all tonight. So I think this is just an all-around kind of a weird stay-away game for me.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. So that's going to wrap things up here with the Pitcher Nail Down. Be sure to check out dailyfantasycafe.com for all our great tools and content.